There's few places richer than an evocative old cemetery like this.
It's a repository of history of the people of Belfast.
It's an important site for the social history of Belfast. You're always learning and there's so much more to learn.
It's a bit like a secret garden. It's the kind of place I'd like to be laid to rest in.
Friar's Bush burying ground. If you're not familiar with Belfast, it's to the south of the city, it's in the university quarter. If you come out of town, past the beautiful Queen's College, the old building of Queen's University, and you take a left up Stramullis Road, just past Botanic Gardens, you've got the large block of the Ulster Museum. Immediately after it, there's this beautiful little Gothic gate lodge with an archway in the middle, and that leads into Friar's Bush.
Many of the people going on tours here are usually local people in Belfast, and they would probably have similar interests to what I would have had. You walk by this cemetery for years, looking into it, wondering what's beyond that gate lodge, and they're just really excited to see about some part of the history of Belfast. But I enjoy bringing people around here and talking about the different stories. And this is basically a story of Belfast in general, this cemetery.
We call ourselves Friends of Friar's Bush. And as the lead guide, it gave me the opportunity to work with many guides who I respect, both as good guides personality-wise and the skills they bring to the table. The guides who work with me, many of them are authors, documentary makers, historians, artists. They've got a range of talents and different areas of interest as well.
I first became interested in local history. Whenever I was a child, I lived beside a graveyard called Knock, one of the oldest graveyards in Belfast, and my dad used to take me and we used to climb over the wall, and that started me getting interested in graveyards themselves, and then I gradually just took off then from that, was interested in that, and then became interested in local history of East Belfast and then branched out Belfast in general.
I used to be a history teacher, and I taught for 37 years, history and politics. So obviously I knew my Irish history, I knew my European history, I knew my world history, but always had an interest in the local. And when I retired from teaching, I started looking more into the history of my city and realised I knew very, very little about it. I could have placed Belfast in the context of Irish history, but to know the actual history of the people and the lives of the people and our buildings and how it came to be the way it is, I just found it absolutely fascinating.
I always had a passion about Belfast history. I also brought my interest further. I went back to Queen's University and did a master's degree and became a qualified historian as well. I used that to pick up more academic skills in terms of research, and ever since then I've been really passionate about the history of Belfast.
My degree is in classical studies, so Greeks and Romans, and I was looking for a new challenge, so I decided then, saw a lot of tours in and around Belfast and thought, right, what will I do? So I went to Belfast Met, started the tour guiding course, and then became a qualified tour guide, then done a couple of tour guiding courses since then.
After I retired, I then trained at Belfast Met, and then I also did the Green Badge, and that's where I met Mark, who is very much the person behind Friar's Bush.
This place is under the care of Belfast City Council as one of these 5 heritage burying grounds. So they had to grant key access, and we had to apply for running events here, tours, and present our credentials as professional tour guides, responsible tour guides, because it's very important to be able to present any aspect of our history to any person, factually, and it's a good discipline.
Well, like most people, you drive past in the Stranmillis Road and you looked in the gates and you wonder what's inside. I had did a tour a number of years ago with the man called Jerry Ward, who actually lived here. But mostly the graveyard was closed, so I'd always been interested in, well, what is it and why is it closed? So really that captured my attention then. And then I started to become more interested in what was behind those big iron gates.
As a student, I lived near here and I would have walked past this regularly and always saw this hidden gem, this beautiful building. It was never open and I always wanted to see what was inside. So when Mark said that he was starting to do some touring in here, I just jumped at the chance and said, is there room for me? And there was room for me. As a guide, not as somebody in a grave.
It's a sort of homecoming in a way in my mind, because my father was from Coleraine, but my mother was a Donnelly. The Donnellys have been in Belfast since at least 1830, when my great-grandfather was born. But I'm wondering about his father, who was in Belfast. Where's he buried? Well, it's very likely that he was buried here. But back then, the records are virtually non-existent. There is certainly, in the old burying ground, there's one headstone from, I think, about 1815 to a Donnelly. And in fact, one of the oldest records of Friar's Bush from 1724 mentions a Neil Donnelly. So it's possible that Neil Donnelly is related to me 3 centuries ago.
I came through the front door, I saw how it began to divide up. I could see at the walls the different types of plots that there were. Saw the railings, but you also saw the nature. Now, one of the things that shocked me about it was how overgrown it was. And I know that a lot of work has been done to sort of pull it back to a wee bit like it should have been. But there's also a wildness to it. There's the flowers are beautiful. It's just kind of magical. It's a bit like a secret garden. It's the kind of place I'd like to be laid to rest at.
The first definitive mention of this place dates from late 1567, and it's on an old map, a very interesting old map by an English cartographer, and on it he has written Friarstown. So there was some little community of holy men living here in the 1500s. Already, the very first mention of this place, it was already in decline, because whatever holy community was here, they would have been dissolved by Henry VIII, the English king, as were all of the old religious foundations. So I'd say this place was already fading away in some regards at that time, but a burying ground persisted, and that is still here today.
Now, the talk is that sometime, maybe around the late 1600s, early 1700s, a friar was saying mass here, obviously in secret, and apparently he was captured or he was shot. We're not exactly sure what way he died, and the congregation scattered and all to the four winds, basically. When they came back, they found the friar dead and buried him here underneath this bush, hence the name Friar's Bush. How far back does people be buried here? It's unknown. The earliest headstone visible here is from 1717, the headstone of Gibson. But it's possible there could be other headstones buried under this ground, basically. But it is an ancient site.
It's very difficult to visualise the past, but the burying ground here used to be in the countryside to the south of the small town of Belfast. It was hidden in the countryside, and it was a traditional burying place for all sections of the community. Really, the Anglicans, the Presbyterians, and the Roman Catholics of the Lagan Valley, all buried here. And that was the way of this place until a very significant year, 1829, when the Botanic Gardens was established, and there was a problem. There was this unsightly and insanitary burying ground. So it was just a hummock of ground, leaning headstones, corners of coffins sticking out, bones on the surface, bodies covered in a mere stratum of earth, and the miasma in the air, as they described it, and the stench of decay.
This here hill that we stand on here was the ancient burial site. It's basically a hill of bones. There's that many people buried here. And some of the people who are buried here would only be just beyond this surface, maybe a few inches or so. I'm sure there's many headstones still buried underneath this surface as well. And it was more because of the population boom in Belfast from the early 1800s. I mean, for example, Belfast had a population of 20,000 people in 1800. By 1860, there was 130,000 people in Belfast. And so there was a need in the early 1800s for another burial site for Catholics. And so this here land was given over to the Catholic Church. They were given 1 acre, which basically covers the area from where I stand, basically up to the Gate Lodge. And it was given by a local aristocrat, the Marquis of Donegal. And the conditions was that they would build a 9-foot wall around here.
And that happened, and this lovely little Gothic Gate Lodge was constructed as part of that. So by the end of 1829, that Gate Lodge was lived in, and fairly shortly afterwards, this site was walled in. So it was out of sight from those who were walking in the park, and also, of course, most importantly of all, it kept the body snatchers out. This is a mort slab or a mort stone. I can tell that it's not a headstone that's fallen because it's got 4 rounded corners, which was standard for a slab that was meant to be horizontal. And on it, it says erect, it's very, very faint though. On it says erected by Patrick McGurl in loving memory of his daughter, Esther, and she died in 1792. It's a very heavy stone. It must be 6 inches thick. The purpose of this stone then is to stop the body snatchers. So this would have been quite an expense to get this piece and place it here in his daughter's grave to stop it being dug up. And this became very prevalent in the late 1700s and into the 1800s. And there are many stories from Friar's Bush about the body snatchers. But we can be confident that Esther still lies here beneath this enormous stone. This opened as a formal cemetery in 1829, and all of the lots were sold. 2 families, and they had their paperwork for that, and the traditional burying ground continued in use and the public ground was in use. But that changed in 1869 when, by act of the Privy Council in Dublin, the old burying ground, the ancient one, was closed, and so was the common ground. So 1869 it closed unless you could come along and show the documentation that you had possession of a family lot, and indeed that there was still capacity in it. So although it closed in 1869, the last burials here were in 2019, 150 years after it closed. We are now at the grave of Daniel Joseph Lavery, who was buried here. I believe it was his ashes were interred here in 2019. So he's one example of those who've been buried here 150 years after the graveyard closed. And he is from the Lavery dynasty, the pub owners. In fact, he lived in the same street as me in Belfast. And beside it are Laverys as well. And there are Laverys in other places around this cemetery. This is one of the biggest families buried in here, and the most continuous as well. And indeed, this graveyard is full of the publicans of early Belfast, and none of them are better remembered than the Laverys. So we had a look here at the most recent Lavery burial. Let's look at the first. Let's go back in time a little to see how the Laverys started in Belfast. So this then is the grave of the first Lavery to come to Belfast, Thomas Lavery. You see, family burying place of Thomas Lavery. he came from Dramara. His father was a successful publican there. Thomas came and he set up his first pub in Corporation Square, the Mariners Tavern, in 1868. And the family went from strength to strength after that. I believe between the wars, that the Laverys controlled over 30 pubs in Belfast and beyond. And of course, still in business today at Bradbury Place, and also Michael Lavery runs the Pavilion on Ormer Road.
So this third tier Gothic monument here lies the remains of Andrew Joseph McKenna. Andrew Joseph McKenna is remembered for his editorial skills. He was a newspaper editor. Now, he was a native of County Cavan. He came to Belfast approximately about 1860 and took up position as editor of the Ulster Observer, which was a Catholic newspaper at the time. The local bishop, Bishop Dorian, would have been involved in that newspaper as well. But as the 1860s progressed, obviously you had the rise in the Fenian movement. There was a dispute between McKenna and Dorian. The Catholic Church were looking to have a good influence over the Catholic community of Belfast, and they were trying to stifle the growth of the Fenian movement, who were also looking to influence at the same time. So there was a bit of a fallout around about 1868, and he ceased to become editor of the Ulster Observer, but he set up his own newspaper in the meantime, the Northern Star. And the Northern Star was named after the old United Irishmen newspaper. He ended up passing away in 1872. He was 39 years old when he died, so he died premature death. But he's remembered for his orator skills and writing skills as well. And of course, he lived in Hollywood and he had a huge funeral, which made its way all the way up here to Friar's Bush. And you can see this big prominent memorial to his memory. And that's because he died in his prime. He was given this magnificent memorial.
Many of the wall lots are of people who showed their success in life by buying the expensive lot, and they lived in Hollywood, the place to live in. The funeral cortege walked the whole way from Hollywood to Friar's Bush, more than 10 miles. And this very curious memorial was put up afterwards. And there's a bit of a story behind that. What about his head? The head of Andrew Joseph McKenna is out there somewhere. This bust was knocked off by vandals in the 70s or the 80s, and whenever it was placed back up there, the head had been broken off, and that head was recovered at that time. We'd love to find it and have the bust restored as well. So the appeal is, bring us the head of Andrew Joseph McKenna. Really, one of the things that thrills me is the discovery of our rich heritage, and then to find a way to present it to inspire others as well. And there's few places richer than an evocative old cemetery like this to share those stories.
There is a lot of history in this cemetery. For years I would have drove by this cemetery and looked in through the gates, always wondering what the story was behind many of the graves within this cemetery. And obviously it's a repository of history of the people of Belfast. Mostly almost like a Catholic graveyard, but there is a wee bit more diversity in it than what people think. And of course I became very passionate about this cemetery. A lot of history. It covers some people who were involved in the development of Belfast, but also many poor people who led destitute lives as well. You have mostly merchants, you have tallow chandlers, you have feather merchants, a lot of wine merchants are buried here as well. You have several newspaper editors here as well, and you have a number of people who fought and died in the Great War, memorialised here as well. So you have a diversity of different people. You have several people from radical movements as well. Probably the most famous person buried here would be Barney Hughes, obviously, the famous Belfast Bab.
We are standing now at the grave of Barney Hughes, Bernard Hughes, and this man was a remarkable citizen of Belfast. He was originally from Armagh. He came to Belfast as an apprentice baker in the 1820s. By the time of his death in 1879, he had become by far the most successful baker in Ireland. And there are many reasons for that. He was a kind man, a liberal man, but a hard-nosed businessman as well. He was an innovator. He paid his employees well. He treated them decently. He ended up leading the industry, and he's still fondly remembered for feeding the poor of Belfast. And Belfast had a horrendous level of poverty. Barney then became the first Catholic councillor in Belfast for Smithfield ward. Though he didn't stand as a Catholic, he stood as a liberal. But nonetheless, he is on record as the first Catholic councillor in Belfast. So a man of great interest and inspiration from many, many aspects of his life.
Very often you'll find local people say the same thing, that they've walked up and down this road and never known what was behind the gate. So they're kind of excited when they come in. But what you can show in this graveyard is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of Irish history. So we can even date it way back to the 800s. We can date it through the medieval period. We then got key events like 1798 Rising is linked here. We've got the Repealers here, so we're talking about the Act of Union. We've got Friar's Bush, which takes us back to the penal laws. You can actually do a chronological walk around the graveyard, which allows you to tell the history of Ireland, but in a very different way.
I'm predominantly interested in women's history, and when I went to become a qualified tour guide, and one of the criteria was you had to decide which kind of tours you were going to do for yourself. Nobody was doing women's walking tours, so I decided that I would do some women's walking tours, and it ties in quite nicely then with doing some of the women who are buried here in Friar's Bush. This is Matthew Bracegirdle, erected in memory of his wife Margaret, who departed this life the 12th of January 1832 in her 40th year of her age. And I like this bit because it said here, this little verse, "Departed shade, thy sorrowing husband here erects this stone and drop the embittered tear. 'Tis all, alas, his grieving heart can do, yet oh too little for a wife like you." So it's a lovely little verse as well. And then "Departed shade" comes from a poem by Robert Burns. And I also like this because in Greek mythology they would talk a lot about departed shade as well, being the spirit of the dead. It also says, "By her side repose the remains of 4 of their children, who all died in infancy, to whom she was a fond and faithful mother." So again, this tells us a little bit about some of the women's history. The lady had 4 children. They're not named here. Very common for women to have a number of children who didn't survive infancy. She didn't name them here, but he still says that she was a fond and faithful mother. And then she died then when she was 40. Tells us a lot about some of the women in Belfast at that time.
This area here, there's 3 headstones together, and these are 2 families who were neighbours in Smithfield, the Bracegirdles and the Donaldsons. And they intermarried. Matthew Bracegirdle married Margaret Donaldson. But the interest here is this stone. This is one of quite a few stones now that I've rediscovered. In May, we had very dry weather for a protracted period. And one effect of that is that you get a scorched patch of grass. So that tells me there's very little soil underneath, and hence the grass has died. I peeled it back like a carpet, and this stone was revealed. Now, it's not in great order, but I've managed to put together the full inscription, and it makes for sobering reading. Erected by Susanna Donaldson in memory of her husband James Donaldson, blacksmith, who departed this life the 8th of January 1829, aged 72 years. Also 16 of his children. Also his son James Donaldson Baker, who departed this life the 5th of April 1827, aged 32 years, and 5 of his children. James Donaldson and his wife Susanna, they lost, of course there's 16 of their children mentioned here. They couldn't name them all on the headstone. Lost in childhood and infancy, but also their son James, who died before them, and their daughter Margaret, who became Margaret Bracegirdle, who died before them. So this poor couple, they lost 18 children in their lifetime. And across these 3 stones, there are mentioned 31 of their children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. These were grim times. Belfast, for all in the early 1800s, was a place where disease, even common infections, killed many. Childhood death was commonplace. And there's no more sobering example of it than the grave of James Donaldson blacksmith.
We have a Facebook page, it's Friar's Bush, and you can go on that. Obviously, you can just turn up here every Friday and Saturday at 11 AM and just pay at the gate. We are in the process of getting people to be able to book online as an alternative way of paying as well. So, but basically, most people just turn up to the gate and that's it. And you'll find a lot of history here. And it's a very exciting tour. Definitely recommended for everyone.
Mark is the driving force behind it, very, very much so. He's absolutely great and a great researcher. But we all get on very well with each other. There's 3 of us who know each other very well, and then more people come along and add on. Some people have different specialities, some people take a more general approach to it. But it's also nice if somebody's got your back, and that if anybody's ill or we can't make it or you need a bit of help, there's always somebody there at the end of the phone to say, look, can you help me out in such and such a date? And there's a sense of collaboration that you have and a real sense of purpose. And we want people of Belfast to see it. We want people to come along and see what's in this graveyard. We want this to work.
It's great. You don't know who's going to turn up. It could be a person who's spent their life living in the next street, or it could be somebody from Australia, somebody from America, who actually, often you can find a connection, which I think is wonderful. If an American comes here, I'd ask, oh, whereabouts in America you're from? And then maybe I'll show you a headstone that mentions a family member buried in New York, or in New Orleans, or in San Francisco, etc., etc. This place is a very local story, but this is an old Irish graveyard. And we've exported our people for centuries, so this place in a very real way links to the world. The social connectiveness of here is very apparent with the community that lives in this area, and with the council allowing us to operate regular tours, then people are reconnecting with their family history. There are people who have been in here who have family connections who haven't been in here, in some cases, in half a century. And there's a deep satisfaction in making those connections and in finding out the stories from them or sharing stories with them that they never knew themselves.
As a tour guide, you're always learning, and I love my tours to be quite interactive because I like people to tell me things. Very often I have done walking tours where somebody has told me something that I didn't already know. Most tour guides will tell you we get ridiculously excited when someone adds a bit into your jigsaw. So we get ridiculously excited about when somebody else knows a name that you've maybe been talking about or looking at. So you're always learning, and there's so much more to learn.
This site and old graveyards in general are crucial to understanding the history of our place. Just a fragment of an old stone can take you on a voyage of historical discovery. You know, these old stones speak. And it's amazing. Between myself, my fellow guides and historians, bouncing off one another, we piece together stories from some graves that you could write a book on.
Sometimes you might even, I always say about women's history, the fact that we even know some women's names tells us they're important. Some of the people here, no records of them other than their headstone. So it's important to remember that there are also many people buried here who will never know who they were, rich and poor. So I think it's an important site for the social history of Belfast. This is some stones which had been gathered up from around the graveyard. It belongs to a lady, it says Rose Garvin on the headstone. Rose Garvin died in September 1855 at the age of 100 years of age. And this is a very small, simple stone. She's the only person named on it. Her name was actually Rose Garvin. When I delved into it a little bit further, her name's actually Rose Garvin. So the spelling is wrong. The rest of her family don't seem to be buried here. But she was 100 years of age, born in 1755. I don't know much else about her, still researching her, but I'd love to know a little bit more about Rose Garvin.
So it was one day I was actually walking past here. It was part of a Belfast Met students who were doing a tour guiding course. And I happened to be lagging behind the main group. And I happened to glance over here and spotted John Griffith's grave. And right away his name jumped out at me because at that time I had been doing a lot of research. I'd been travelling down to Dublin National Archives. They hold the whole repository of the Fenian movement in Belfast. And so it was actually great to find this grave eventually, just by chance. Griffiths was born in Belfast in 1827. He was involved in the Young Ireland within the repeal movement. They were trying to reach out to Protestants, radical nationalist Protestants. And they had a certain amount of success in Belfast. John Griffiths would have been interned without trial in 1866 and again in 1867. Like several of the leaders of the Fenian movement, John Griffiths went on to become a Home Ruler. He continued on in his activities right up close to when he died. He eventually passed away in 1892 at the age of 65. But John Griffiths, obviously, he epitomised, he lived through so many different radical movements throughout the 1800s. And this is his grave here.
Other things that I like about it is that, and this might sound contradictory, but there's so many stories that we don't know in here. We know that we're walking on land where people's stories will be lost forever, but you can imagine as you learn from other people who you do learn about and the graves that you do know about and the people you do know about, you get an idea of what their lives would have been like living in Belfast, but you always want to know more. You always want to know more.
Belfast was growing rapidly in the Victorian era, and there were only two traditional burying grounds, Friar's Bush and Shankill, very much oversubscribed. And needs must, an enormous amount of people were packed into a small piece of ground. Records fully, or nearly fully, from 1869. Before that, the records are missing. Hopefully not forever. It'd be wonderful if they turned up again. Even if I had those, dead carts would come in here regularly during times of famine and epidemic, and they would be buried probably nameless, no records kept of them at all. So it's a guessing game, but certainly I'd be surprised if there are less than 20,000 people lying in this small piece of ground.
We come into a cemetery sometimes and we would sort of unearth more and more graves. There is a book that gives grave inscriptions, and obviously we would trawl through it and try and find out where certain graves are, and some of the information's a bit scant, but it's always exciting to try and delve into the thick brambles and grass foliage and try and unearth certain graves. We have unearthed several ones. Some of them have been actually buried underneath the ground. We've peeled away the surface and unearthed some graves, so it's always exciting. You know, it's a constantly It's a gift that keeps giving, of course. There's many graves that we have unearthed, so it is an exciting place to be in. Every time we come in here, we just wonder what we're going to find each time we come in.
It still amazes me. Or somebody comes in and a passing comment starts me on another wonderful journey into our past. So I think here it will never be exhausted of stories. I still think after that length of time, I'm still at the start of this journey.